Hello and welcome. I'm Elaine Canyon, sweetly writing happily ever after, one book at a time. And in this video, we're building your cover design toolbox. Okay, we've talked about color and we've talked about typography. And now we're going to talk about layout. In design, when we're talking about layout, we're talking about the composition of our design. We're talking about all of the elements that are involved in the design and how we've arranged them in the page. Good composition arranges all of those elements so that they bring focus to whatever your focal point is. Your focal point or your focus is what you want the viewer to see first and what is most important to the design that you're creating. There are a lot of ways that we can put emphasis on our focus. If you've watched the 11 Principles of Design video that I put up, I'll link it in the cards, you're going to see a lot of those same elements coming back in here, and there's a reason for that. Those 11 Principles of Design are what we rely on as designers to make sure that our designs look appealing, but they also serve whatever their purpose is. So in the case of a book cover, it's going to help us sell the book. We'll use things like scale, which is how big or small something is, contrast with things like our color choice or pattern interruptions, or positioning scaled elements close to each other, like big next to small. We'll also use things like leading lines. Leading lines are using the elements in your design. Sometimes they are actually lines that point to something to bring the viewer to whatever the focus of your design is. It usually isn't actually lines that point to what your focus is, though sometimes it can be. Leading lines can also direct the eye to one side or the other of a design. And then you can use them for converging lines. So if you've ever seen a picture of someone who's in a forest and they've laid down on the ground, they take a picture and all of the tree branches and tree trunks move up and create what we call converging lines. That is another form of leading lines. All of the trunks of the tree push you upwards. If you remember, we talked about in the 11 Principles of Design, the book cover, A Court of Tricksters. And I talked about how much I loved the tree trunks inside of the silhouette. I'll throw the picture up here just so you can see it, and I'll zoom in on just the silhouette. The tree trunks there help draw the eye up to the faces of the silhouette, because they're leading lines that are drawing us up to look at the focus, which is the couple, and then you move up past them again to get to the title. It's a really good use of design. It's a reason why it's my favorite book cover. We also have hierarchy, where we arrange things so that you see the most important one first. We have depth, which I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the video. There's balance. That is the one that most people learn to see first. When I've talked about the designer's eye, balance is the first thing most designers learn to see, and most non-designers can see it too. You can quickly tell if a design feels heavy on one side or the other. If you'll remember her in A Court of Tricksters, her hair sweeps up, his cape sweeps down, and between the two of them, we've created balance in the silhouette and the rest of the design. We can also use negative space and positive space. Negative space is what you would commonly refer to as empty space. The page looks empty. That means it has a lot of negative space. You also can use positive space, but both of those on the extremes are bad. A cluttered design is not going to fulfill its purpose well, whereas an empty design isn't going to fulfill its purpose either, because both of them can feel too much. They can feel overpowering. Drawing the viewer to your focus can also be done with things like repetition and pattern. If your focus interrupts that repetition or interrupts that pattern, that is a really good way to bring viewers to the focus of your design as well. So there are a lot of ways to bring the viewer to your focus, and I've just quickly gone over a few of them here. Go watch the 11 Principles of Design. That's going to give you a lot more depth and detail and understanding of how to control the way someone looks at your book cover. But let's talk about now the different kinds of composition. Now, there are more than what I'm going to go over here, but I'm going to go over these 6 because in my research, I've seen these 6 used more often than not in book covers. As I go through these 6 compositional layouts, I'm going to put an illustration up on the screen so that you can get an idea of what it looks like. In the next video, we're going to go through and do an example of each one and talk about where you can see these compositional layouts in each design. My favorite compositional layout is the first one we're going to talk about, and it is the rule of thirds. The way the rule of thirds works is splitting the design layout into thirds vertically and horizontally. I've highlighted the intersecting points with 2 big dots. That is where the eye will naturally fall. And so you would put your focus there, up at those 2 dots on the top part of the center third. The reason this works is because depending on how text or image heavy your design is, the eye naturally falls either top to bottom or center out. And when it comes to a book cover design, we want to make sure that we're pulling the reader in on either side of that spectrum. And so by putting your focus to the top part of the center third, it helps the reader even if they're going to come at your book top to bottom because it's a text heavy book cover, or center out because it's an image heavy book cover. You're grabbing your reader's attention either way because you're putting it close enough to both of those points and bringing the viewer in so that they'll focus on what your focus of your cover is. The next one is really simple. It's called the rule of odds, and it just means that you choose an odd number of elements for your design. So you're either going to have a minimum of 3 elements or anything above that that is in an odd number. I will caution you in book cover design when it comes to big elements, not just the pretty background stuff. When it comes to big elements, don't go more than 5 to 7. It can get really difficult to see, especially on a little thumbnail, what's going on in your book cover if you've got 7 or 9 big elements that all need to play a part in there. So simplicity is your friend when it comes to the rule of odds. So simplicity is your friend when it comes to using the rule of odds. This next one, I'm going to geek out a little bit on you here. So this is called the golden ratio. And I love math. I've always loved math. I think it's really cool that numbers can explain our world, and I think it's fun to learn about it. If you've ever heard of something called the Fibonacci sequence, the Fibonacci sequence is a sequence of numbers. Now, the ratio of these numbers comes down to 1.618, and that's not important for the design, but it's a cool thing that I thought I'd tell you. The way the Fibonacci sequence works is you take 0 and 1. You add them together, and that gives you your third number. So 0 plus 1 is 1. Our sequence now, instead of reading 0, 1, reads 0, 1, 1. Next, we take the last 2 numbers, we add them together to get our fourth number. So 1 plus 1 is 2. Now the sequence reads 0, 1, 1, 2. We do it again. 1 plus 2 is 3. Now the sequence reads 0, 1, 1, 2, 3. And again. And it goes on forever. What's cool about this is it creates a spiral. So I'm going to put it up on the screen, but the spiral that this creates that you can see on the screen, that's the line that we're going to follow as we arrange our elements. We're going to arrange them along that spiral. This can give your book cover a really organic feeling because you find the golden ratio in so many places in nature, again and again and again, always the same ratio, always the same spiral. So it can be a really good way for you to arrange the elements on your design to draw the focus in, placing your most important pieces along that spiral. Next is the golden triangle, and this works similarly to the way that the rule of thirds did. I'm going to put the illustration up here, but you can see that there's a line that cuts the rectangle in half, so I have 2 triangles. And from the opposite corners, I come into that dissecting line, and now I've created 4 triangles. So I've split my rectangle into 2 triangles, and then I've split those 2 triangles into 2 more triangles to give me 4 in total. Where these 2 new lines intersect on that first dissecting line, that's where your most important elements are going to go. They're going to go on either both of those intersecting points or just on the top one or just on the bottom one so that you can draw the viewer to whatever your focus of your book cover is. Next is framing, and that's a really simple one. It basically just means that you're putting a frame around your focus, whether that is the entire book cover. For some people, that is what they're going to do. A Court of Tricksters is a good example of that. Or whether it's framing just the focus. So you could put a frame around the main character in your book. This is an easy way to create focus on what is most important. Now, I promised I'd come back to depth when I was talking about how you could add emphasis to your focus, and this is the point where we come back to it. This is perspective. Perspective means that you're using the foreground, middle ground, and background of the design to create emphasis on the focus. The foreground is what's closest to the viewer. Usually this is considered the bottom of the design. And so you would take that bottom part and you put the most important thing, like your character. Then in the middle, you would put the next most important thing. So in your middle ground, you would put maybe the title. And then in the background, which is going to be what's furthest away from your viewer, that's where you'd put the least important element of your design. This composition method incorporates depth, it incorporates space, it incorporates scale. All of these things come together so that the viewer is immediately drawn to the focus of your design. So these 6 are the ones that we're going to talk about in the next video. I'll have examples of each one so that you can see how the composition looks in action. And you'll be able to see in those examples as well, things like layering being used to add focus, horizon lines being used to add focus. You'll see filling the frame where the most important image takes up the entire design. That also adds focus. You'll see examples of simplification where anything that can be taken out is taken out so that all you see are the most important things. And you're going to see a lot of left to right. I've talked about this before. I was trained in the United States to work in the United States. So everything I've learned has a Western culture twist to it. One of the things you'll see in book covers created in the West is a left to right focus. And that's because we read left to right. And you can take advantage of that in your design. You can use that to help control how a viewer moves through your book cover. So you're going to see left to right as an example in all of the book covers in the next video as well. Know that if you are in an Eastern culture, you're going to want to adjust for that. If you and your culture do not read left to right, you're going to want to flip it to how you do read. If you read right to left, then you're going to just take everything that we talk about when we talk about these book covers next time and switch them so that it moves in the correct direction for where you are and the target demographic you're trying to reach. Have you noticed any of these 6 designs in book covers that you've seen? I'd love to hear in the comments if you immediately were able to say, oh, I know a book cover that uses that. I want to know your examples. I want to know your favorites. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It helps other authors find it. And if you don't want to miss the next video where I tell you how to choose the correct composition for your layout and how to know what the focus of your book cover should be, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I post videos on Wednesdays about cover design, discovery writing, and self-publishing on a tiny budget. I hope to see you again soon.